Most people associate New York with skyscrapers, Times Square, and its non-stop pace of life. But today, we're going to show you a completely different side of the city. A New York that is hundreds of years old. In this video, we'll explore the 5 oldest buildings in the city, places that still remember the colonial era and literally witness the birth of the metropolis. And make sure to watch until the very end, because in the final segment, you'll see the real jewel of this list, the oldest building in New York. The 5th building is Friends Meeting House. It is located in Flushing, Queens at 137 to 16 Northern Boulevard, Flushing, New York, 11354. It is one of the oldest religious buildings in New York City, and at first glance it may seem very modest, but that modesty is exactly where its real historical power lies. The building was constructed in 1694, and in the early 18th century, it was expanded. It is a Quaker meeting house built for a religious community that valued simplicity, inner discipline, and freedom of conscience more than any outward display. That is why Friends Meeting House does not look like a grand cathedral or an imposing public landmark. It is restrained, quiet, almost unnoticeable against the background of the modern city. But places like this often turn out to be the most important ones. The history of this building is deeply connected to the idea of religious freedom in early New York. In the 17th century, the right to openly practice one's faith was far from guaranteed. Religious communities often faced pressure and persecution. So, the appearance of a permanent place for worship meant much more than the construction of another building. It was a sign that the community had endured, taken root, and left its mark on the city. What makes Friends Meeting House especially fascinating is that it speaks not through drama, but through silence. There is no story here of a great battle or a major political revolution, but there is something just as important: the story of people who simply wanted to live according to their conscience. And in many ways, that is what real urban history is made of. Not only big names and dramatic dates, but also places where the everyday right to be yourself was quietly formed. Today, Friends Meeting House reminds us that old New York was not only about trade, ports, and the future rise of skyscrapers. It was also about communities that quietly, stubbornly, and without spectacle built their lives here. And maybe that is exactly why this building matters so much. It shows that the history of the city rests not only on power, but also on human resilience. The 4th building is Alice Austen House. It is located on Staten Island at 2 Highland Boulevard, Staten Island, New York, 10305. Today, the house looks like a beautiful historic site overlooking the water, but its story runs much deeper than that of a picturesque old building. The oldest part of the structure dates to 1690. Originally, it was a small Dutch farmhouse, highly practical, with no unnecessary decoration, built for daily life, work, and survival. This was the New York of the colonial frontier, long before the city became a global metropolis. There were no skyscrapers, no neon lights, no sense yet of being the center of the world. Life here revolved around land, family, and basic necessities. But the house gained its true cultural significance much later, when it became the home of Alice Austen, one of the most remarkable early American photographers. It was she who transformed this place from a historic building into a meeting point of several important stories at once. Alice Austen photographed New York, its people, streets, daily routines, transportation, fashion, and atmosphere. Because of her, this house became not just an architectural landmark, but also a place connected to a vast visual archive of city life. And that is the central paradox of Alice Austen House. Its foundation belongs to the colonial era, but its cultural voice comes from the modern world of photography, personal perspective, and memory. It is almost like a house that lives several different lives, first as a farmhouse, then as a family residence, and later as a place where the visual history of New York was captured and preserved. Today, this house is seen not simply as an old structure, but as a deeply human story about how one place can survive centuries without losing its relevance. It brings together architecture, art, personal destiny, and the transformation of the city itself. And that is why Alice Austen House fits so well in a story about New York's oldest buildings. It shows that age alone does not define historical importance. What matters too is a place's ability to remain meaningful across generations. The third building is Conference House. It is located on Staten Island at 7455 Highland Boulevard, Staten Island, New York, 10307. It is one of the oldest houses in New York City, but what matters most about it is not only when it was built, it is the fact that this was a place where the fate of an entire country might once have been decided. The house was built around 1680. Its solid, imposing appearance sets it apart from many other early structures in the city. It feels heavier, more significant, as if it carries history in its walls, and that feeling is justified. In 1776, this house became the site of the famous peace conference held during the American Revolution. It was here that representatives of the British Crown and the American colonies met in an attempt to find a path toward peace. Among the colonial delegates were Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Edward Rutledge. Just imagine that moment. The war is already underway. The stakes are incredibly high. And inside an old house on the edge of Staten Island, a handful of men are trying to negotiate the future of a continent. It feels almost like a scene from a historical film, yet it really happened. The negotiations failed, no agreement was reached, and the war continued. That is exactly why Conference House is so important. It is not a place of triumph, but a place of a lost possibility, a point where history might have gone in a completely different direction. And because of that, the house carries a special kind of power. It is not just an architectural monument, but a symbol of how some of the most important places in history are the places where decisions were almost made, but never were. For the history of New York, Conference House matters for another reason as well. It reveals a side of the city that people do not always think about. New York is usually associated with finance, immigration, rapid growth, and cultural explosion. But here we see it as a stage for major political history long before the rise of the modern metropolis. It is a reminder that New York mattered not only as a center of trade, but also as a place where truly world-changing questions were once on the table. The second building is Bone House. It is located in Flushing, Queens at 37-01 Bone Street, Flushing, New York, 11354. It is one of the oldest surviving homes in New York City, but its importance goes far beyond colonial architecture and age. The house was built around 1661, and while it may look like a neat old colonial home from the outside, Bone House is actually tied to one of the most important themes in early American history: the struggle for religious freedom. Its owner, John Bone, became a key figure in a conflict between individual conscience and colonial authority. At that time, religious life in the colonies was tightly controlled. When John Bone allowed Quakers to gather in his home, it was seen as a direct challenge to the established order. He was arrested, persecuted, and pressured, but he refused to give in. That story turned Bone House from an ordinary residence into a place where private life suddenly became part of a much larger fight for the right to live according to one's beliefs. And that is probably the greatest strength of Bone House. It shows that the history of freedom does not always begin in government buildings, public squares, or courtrooms. Sometimes it begins inside an ordinary home, in a single room where a few people gather simply because they believe they should have the right to do so. Stories like this are what transform old buildings from walls and timber into living symbols. They become places where ideas are born, ideas that later shape the identity of an entire nation. Another important detail is that the house remained closely connected to the Bone family for generations. Because of that, it still carries the feeling of a real lived-in place rather than a staged historical set. It is not an abstract symbol of the past, but a place where history accumulated layer by layer. And that is exactly why Bone House works so well in a list like this. It combines an intimate domestic atmosphere with a major historical theme that would later become central to the American story. The first building is a Wyckoff House Museum. It is located in Brooklyn at 5816, Clarendon Road, Brooklyn, New York, 11203. This house is widely recognized as the oldest surviving structure in New York City, and that fact alone makes it completely unique. The oldest part of the house dates to around 1652. That means Wyckoff House was standing long before the New York we know today even existed in any recognizable form. There was no famous skyline, no bridges, no dense urban landscape. In place of the future metropolis were fields, farmsteads, and a rural way of life built around land and survival. And it was in that world that this house first appeared. What makes Wyckoff House especially fascinating is that it was not built as a palace, a fortress, or a government building. It was simply a farmhouse. And that is exactly what gives it so much power. Because the oldest surviving building in New York tells a story not about power, but about everyday life. Not about ceremony or grand decisions, but about labor, family, household life, and the rhythms from which great cities are actually born. It creates a striking contrast with the modern image of New York as a capital of speed, money, and global influence.